Welcome to Rolmo, Interviews with Positive Energy. I'm Yeshe Wangmo, and today I have the honor and pleasure of meeting with my Dharma sister, Chonyi Drolma, also known as Anne Holland. Chonyi is the translator of the visional autobiography of a Tibetan master, Dudjom Lingpa. Her book is entitled A Clear Mirror, and it was published by Rangjung Yeshe in 2011. Dudjom Lingpa lived in 19th century Eastern Tibet. He is widely revered as one of the greatest treasure revealers of modern times, and also as a Tibetan Buddhist master, he is honored with the title Dharma King. His autobiography, unlike many others in this genre of literature, is a unique and detailed account of his inner life and personal spiritual journey. Welcome, Chonyi. I'm very happy to be Skyping with you. Today is Guru Rinpoche Day, and also you're joining me from my old hometown in Montreal, Quebec. So this is really wonderful for me. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be asked to be part of your Rolmo series. And I'm so happy to be able to revisit this book that I love so much and that I think can really be of service to others.
You know, my intention for our time together is to bring people to read this wonderful book, because of course they will learn about Dudjom Lingpa and they will receive Dharma teachings, but more than that, I really believe that readers will find some personal insights into their own spiritual journey towards awakening, and that is just invaluable. So I firmly believe that this book, it is a historical account, but it also has immediate relevancy to anyone who is treading the path to awakening. So again, thank you for joining me today and helping me to connect people with the Dharma. Chonyi, I see that you've described Dudjom Lingpa as a saint, a genius, a virtuoso. You've also said that A Clear Mirror is not a Buddhist book, but it is a book about awakening and manifesting one's deepest altruistic potential. I'm very excited to explore that theme with you in this interview, but before we begin that, I simply have to satisfy my own personal curiosity about you, your spiritual path, your educational background, and how you came to do this translation. So I hope you could share that with us.
I'd like to. I grew up on the eastern shore of Maryland, and it was a very beautiful place, very rural. And my parents were not religious in any way, but at the same time they were very open, and they always encouraged us. They didn't have a problem if we went to church with friends, that sort of thing. And the area and the time I grew up in was very homogenous, both culturally and in terms of religion. And I knew pretty early on that I wasn't, although I had wonderful Christian friends, that wasn't really the path that I was going to take. And I think I started searching early on, but even at the library, there weren't necessarily any books on other religions, or I didn't know how to find them. So I just, you know, from being an early teenager, I just sort of kept my eyes open. And I found out a little bit later in life when I became very involved in Buddhism, and my sister did as well. We actually had deep religious roots on both sides of my family, which I find sort of curious. That my mother's father's father, his family was very serious, very serious Jewish family in Baltimore. I believe they were conservative or Orthodox. And on my father's side, his father's father was a very well-regarded Southern Baptist preacher who actually was itinerant and would go from town to town at different points. And so my parents had gotten away from those roots, but were still respectful of them. And we sometimes joke that the religious roots resurfaced in my generation.
Yeah, I like that.
So then I ended up going to school at Swarthmore College outside of Philadelphia. And my very first semester there, I had a wonderful course with Professor Mark Wallace, who ended up being my thesis advisor, called Problems in Religious Thought. And we were reading all kinds of books and articles, and some of which were about Buddhism, Zen, Theravada, not necessarily Vajrayana. And right away, I thought, okay, this philosophy, this way of interpreting reality really works for me. It works with the way I've experienced reality since I was a young child. I really responded to the idea of karma, of everything, being cause and effect. And I also had a great sense of the enlightened heritage that goes along with Buddhism, and that we are always, that our true nature is always accessible to us, and that we've never been separated from that, from moment to moment and from lifetime to lifetime. So through that course, really the first few days of college, I connected with Buddhism, and then from then on, it was just a matter of finding the flavor of Buddhism and finding my teachers.
Wow. And how did that come about, finding your teachers?
I decided that I needed to go live in a Buddhist country to get a real sense of the context. And I might have ended up in Nepal, where many of our teachers hail from and currently live, except that I wanted to live in a tropical climate, which you could probably relate to. So I actually ended up in Sri Lanka, which has a really wonderful Theravada tradition, and I lived with a family. And again, I met very wonderful practitioners, especially my host mother, who the very first day that I met her took me by the hand and said, if you want to learn how to meditate, I will teach you how to meditate. And that was just such an affirming thing, because here is a woman who has raising 2 children, working a full-time job. Her husband's working a full-time job on the other side of the country, and she still took the time to meditate very early in the morning and listen to her Pali chants on the radio. And so that for me, again, affirmed right away that I was in the right place. I was in the right, I was going in the right direction. Then we had an opportunity at the end of the trip in Sri Lanka to go to India for a few weeks, because it's very close by. And I thought, okay, I'll go. And then I found on my bookshelf in the room where I'd been living for close to 6 months, Trungpa's book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And this is a very small room and a very small bookshelf, and I'd never seen it before. And I'd never heard of him or anything like it. So I opened it and I read it practically in one sitting. And I thought, okay, this completely makes sense. I need to learn more about this philosophy. I need to learn more about the Tibetans. So the way I decided to start that process was to go to Dharamsala with my few weeks. And I had a friend who was going to Dharamsala to work on her thesis. So I just sort of tagged along. And when I got there, I got terrible altitude sickness. And I grew up at sea level. I was living, at sea level. And my hands were puffy, and, I just basically could do little more than drink tea. But I met Tibetans while I was there, and I found their spirit and their resilience and their joy in exile, even watching the incredible tragedy of what was happening in Tibet when they left, what's happening in Tibet currently, and they really didn't bear any grudges. And actually some people said, we shouldn't be upset with the Chinese as a people, it's more the government. And they just had this incredible, I would describe it as a very resilient joyfulness.
That really impacted you, to see that.
And these were Tibetans I met at the tea shop.
Yeah.
And so that really hooked me. And then after that, I went back to school, and then decided that I would do, that the next thing to do was to do some kind of Tibetan retreat. And again, I had no idea what that meant. It just seemed like the next step. And then I saw a photo of Lama Tarchen Rinpoche in Shambhala Sun. And I looked at the website, and Pimo Saling in California, his center, was hiring a cook. And I was moving to California anyway to look for a job in Silicon Valley in the software field. So 2 weeks after I graduated from college, I moved to Pimo Saling for a short time and met Lama Tarchen Rinpoche, and that was the beginning and the end.
That's ongoing, right?
Yes, very much so.
So Lama Tarchen Rinpoche, of course, is a master in the Dudjom lineage. So I know that he is he's all over Dudjom Lingpa and His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche. So that must have been your connection with Dudjom Lingpa through Lama Tarchen Rinpoche?
It definitely was. In fact, it was through Lama Tarchen Rinpoche and through Vajrayana Foundation, Pimo Saling in general, it took me a long time to sort out what the practices were and the liturgies and the different deities. As you know, it can be a little overwhelming, but I just kept hearing Dudjom, 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 and these beautiful stories Lama Tarchin would tell about his own root Lama, Dudjom Rinpoche, and with whom he spent at least 45 years of his life. And so I became interested in, I became very committed to the Dudjom lineage through Lama Tarchin, through the practices, and through doing Nundro, the preliminary practices that, of course, Lama Tarchin prescribes for all his students.
I also know, and maybe I'll just share with our viewers, that you have done a long term of personal retreat at Pamo Saling under the guidance of Lama Tarchin Rinpoche. And I think it's okay to let everyone know that probably your connection to translate this book came about in one of those retreats, right?
Yes, I did a total of 6 years of retreat under Lama Tarchin Rinpoche, which was an incredible privilege and definitely, I think, will always be one of the high points of my life and my own spiritual evolution. And I had always been interested in translation. I studied a little bit in college. And then after a few years of studying on my own, Lama Nawang Zangpo, who is one of Kala Rinpoche's students and translators and has translated many books, agreed to teach me and another Vajra sister. So we continued to work on that. Then when I went into retreat, I had more time between sessions to apply myself, and I started to read more. And then Lama Nawang agreed to work with me, reading longer texts and with my interpretation. And then because of being able to meditate and read texts that applied directly to my meditation, I think my comprehension really it progressed in leaps and bounds at that point, and that was very encouraging. So then Lama Nawang and I had read several longer texts, commentaries, and different things already, and he thought, he said, let's read Dudjom Lingpa's autobiographies. It's very long and a lot of colloquial words that I wasn't familiar with that you wouldn't see in a liturgy, but we kept at it, and it was just deeply, deeply inspiring from the very beginning. And so I'm reading this, and then one evening probably in the middle of the retreat, we were all in the kitchen hanging out with Lama Tarchin, which is one of the best parts of retreat, and that's when many of the most pith teachings occur, is just the most casual points. And Lama Tarchin is talking about the Dudjom lineage and talking about Dudjom Lingpa, and then it was late and he got up to leave, and he said on his way out, really sort of said over his shoulder, Dudjom Lingpa's Namtar autobiography is really important, it should be translated. And then he walked out the door. And I took that as it's both permission and a sort of inspiration to translate the autobiography, and then I just started working on it.
I see.
And I worked on it throughout the middle, probably 3 years of the retreats. And then between the retreats, I met Marcia, who agreed to publish it through Rangjung Yeshe Publications. And then everything really just fell into place. But I think the most valuable part, besides having the book actually translated and being able to offer it to my teachers and to my spiritual community, having it actually exist, is how much it helped me during my own retreat. I was constantly, I would have questions that I either wouldn't have a chance to ask Lama Tarchin, or sometimes I was too embarrassed to ask, and they would come up during sessions or come up, sort of these nagging questions, and I would open the Namtar to translate, and the answer would be right there. It would either be in Dudjom Lingpa's own words or Dudjom Lingpa's own experience, or teachings that Dudjom Lingpa was receiving from his visionary teachers. And that happened over and over. Just really affirmed for me how much it needed to be translated, because I thought, if this is my experience, then this can be anyone's experience who comes into contact with this book.
How beautiful.
So that was a really magical part of the translation process.
That is, so many circumstances came together to produce this translation, which is really needed when doing a Dharma translation. It's not really, the technical skill is just so minor compared to what the circumstances of excellence, yeah, the excellence of the place and the time and the teacher and the retinue and the content. Everything came together for this project, and so I'm sure that it's a work that will have a long-standing impact for people, because it's not an ordinary let's just translate this. So thank you for sharing in so much detail about that experience. And I think that by now our viewers must be really excited to actually get into the life of Dudjom Lingpa. And I know that there are many, like you said, there are many things about his life. It's a whole panorama. But if you could kind of give us a synopsis to introduce Dudjom Lingpa, maybe imagine that someone knows nothing about Dudjom Lingpa, and just give us the landscape of his life generally, and then we'll go into more detail.
Okay.
Thanks.
So Dudjom Lingpa was born in 1835 in eastern Tibet. He lived until 1904. He traveled very little, so most of the entire setting is eastern Tibet. And he was born to very humble origins. His parents were, of course, practitioners, but they weren't lamas, they weren't part of an institution. And in fact, in one early story talks about his mother going to dig potatoes to feed the family. So they didn't have, it appears they didn't even have really helpers or servants. And he had a very unique childhood in that from even before his birth, when he was still inside of his mother, he was already having visions of dakinis and spiritual heroes fighting with demons to protect his life, to protect the life of his mother. And even before that, Dudjom Lingpa's origins go back to Yeshe Tsogyal and Guru Rinpoche in a conversation they had, a very frank conversation where Yeshe Tsogyal says to Guru Rinpoche, we really need to send an emissary to Tibet at this place at this time, because there are students there who need help, and because the time is becoming more and more dangerous and degenerate, particularly for the doctrine and for practitioners. And this emanation needs to be very, very powerful. So Guru Rinpoche called on Dudjom Lingpa, who at that point was in his previous incarnation in whatever Pure Land they were residing in, and said, it's time for you to go back. And Dudjom Dorje, who was Dudjom Lingpa's previous incarnation, said, I really don't want to. It's just too hard. The people are too hard to deal with, the stakes are too high, I don't want to do it. And Yeshe Tsogyal and Guru Rinpoche didn't give him a choice. And so then he reincarnated to these very humble origins in eastern Tibet, and to a large degree, his destiny was already very much in place.
Every good life starts with a directive, yeah?
Right.
And a mission. That was clear.
Exactly. And so and again, even though his destiny was in place and he had these very exalted origins, he struggled his entire life, start to finish, which is one of the most compelling parts I find about his life. You know, if he lived in modern times, he probably would have had credit card debt. He would have been evicted from various places. He probably would have been ridiculed for not, adhering to social norms. And that was essentially his problem throughout life. As I was saying, his childhood was very unusual. His companions were primarily deities and different local protectors who often took on very wrathful forms, such as scorpions or creatures that looked like demons but were in fact protecting him. Two of the figures that occur very early in his life story on several occasions are Dorje Pakmo, who is Vajra sow, because she has a sow's head coming out the crown of her head to signify ignorance being eradicated. She's always red, surrounded by fire, and very, very frightening to anyone, let alone a 3-year-old so she appears to 3-year-old Dudjom Lingpa, and in a vision where he goes to her Pure Land, which is on fire and filled with blood and bodies, and tells him that he has a lot in store in his life, including demonic enemies, and that he needs to be very, very careful. So this happens at age 3. So this is one of his early companions. This is very wrathful female deity. And then again at age 6, he goes to visit her, and as he says, he goes to visit her and she's sitting on a throne of bloody human heads. Mm-hmm. And here's the 6-year-old at the feet of this fiery, wrathful goddess. And again, she gives him very specific instructions on which practices to do, which he does end up connecting with later in life, and tells him about the treasures that he'll reveal. And her prediction is quite accurate. And this won't come to fruition for close to 2 decades. So these are his early visions at age 3 and 6, amid many other visionary journeys. And the other companion who it's important to note, who befriends him at a very early age, is the doctrine protector that's very particular to the Dudjom lineage, which is Nujin Shempa Marnak, which means harm-inflicting dark red butcher. And again, this is a very imposing figure who, on many, many occasions throughout his life, flies in to save his life, starting at an early age, gives him directions, at one point actually scolds him, which for practitioners is a little defies some logic, because here's the Lama and the doctrine protector who's supposed to be serving him, and he's scolding Dudjom Lingpa and giving him guidance. So it was a very important relationship there. And Shempa actually at a later point makes predictions about his 7th son being reborn. So again, here is one of his constant faithful companions, and it's a very imposing, wrathful figure, which in the West, we have horror movies, but it's a little bit difficult to get our heads around sometimes.
So then how did it come about? One of the main characteristics of Dudjom Lingpa is his role as a treasure revealer, or a terchen. So you mentioned before it was prophesied, and it came about probably in his 20s. Is there any more specific details about how his discoveries, were they earth treasures or mine treasures, and how did that happen?
So his earth treasure revelation is very well detailed in the book. Okay. It happens at age 25 in Golok, which is an area near where he was born. He travels to Golok at age 23, based on visionary directives, again, saying that he'll meet students there and that there is a big, a divine purpose for him going there. And he also notes later in the story that his first mine treasure, which is in the pure vision category, meaning that it was catalyzed by a pure vision. In his case, a pure visions with the three protectors. His first mine treasure came forth at age 23, although there aren't more details regarding that treasure or the other 2 pure vision mine treasures that he reveals. And so these 4 treasures, the 1 earth treasure and the 3 pure vision mine treasures, compose most of his body of work, and which is compiled into 18 volumes.
So the terma, Black Wrathful Dakini cycle that we have in the Dudjom lineage, is this part of his mine treasure, pure vision? Is this part of the treasures you're speaking about?
It's part of the pure vision treasure,
wow.
Yes.
That's great to know the actual origin of all of that. So what did people think about Dudjom Lingpa? I mean, how was he perceived by the community? And I know that he was known for wrathful activity, but I'm kind of curious about, how he was perceived in the community. And especially not the ordinary people and maybe the institutional hierarchy. What did they think of him?
For the most part, he wasn't well regarded until later in his life. And I would say as late as age 28, and then later even, I think that the first big signifier of his ascension as a major public figure didn't really occur until he was 44. So he reveals his earth treasure at age 25. There have been several interactions before this where at individual levels, a tuku, or reincarnate lama, will regard him as someone special, or several of his teachers who didn't give him Dzogchen teachings but gave him sort of grammar teachings and Nundra teachings, would regard him as special, but at the same time, he didn't have recognition on a greater scale. And that's one of the things that he actually consistently complains about in the book, is that he feels like he's really isolated, doesn't have a refuge above, he doesn't have any supporters below or beside him. And that actually rings fairly true. When he was 28, 3 years after his earth treasure was revealed, he notes that a very well-respected Lama, Anam Longchen, whose reincarnation is Anam Tutin Rinpoche, who has a center in the Bay Area in California and has been one of my teachers. He seeks him out. Anam Longchen seeks Dudjom Lingpa out at the recommendation of another very well-respected Lama, and basically says, "I heard great things about you. I want to be connected to you." And that's a very big step, because before that, he mentioned he taught students, he had some patrons, he did some rituals, but that was the first sort of peer-related recognition that comes. And the interesting thing is that even at this point, he still appears to have just a few students around him, a few patrons have been mentioned, but he doesn't in any sense have any institutional grounding, and he doesn't seem to express any interest in it. I mean, he's passed through different monasteries, but it's not even really clear where he's living right now.
But at the same time, he's struggling with the necessities of daily life,
right?
But he's not wanting to solve those problems by, I don't know, connecting up with an institution or following. He chooses his independence and wandering around, living in encampments and everything like that. So there's this kind of struggle with the ordinary things of life, the mortgage and all of that. And at the same time, there's this keeping distance from maybe some of the things that could have alleviated that, yeah?
Definitely.
For him, yeah, so he made that choice. I think that that's an interesting insight when I talked about insights that we could draw for our personal life. You know, I hear that so much in my own life, and I don't think so much a struggle, because what kind of struggle is there really in America for someone like me? Is I have food and housing. It's not like that. But still, comparatively speaking, you know, Dharma practitioners often face this tension between providing for their family and themselves and then their spiritual journey. So it's good to know that even great masters had that, had that tension, yeah. And so I'd like to also talk about Dudjom Lingpa's children, because I've been thinking about some of the things that are really extraordinary about him as a Tibetan master. And I don't know of any other Tibetan masters who had so many illustrious children, really beginning a dynasty.
Dudjom Lingpa's children, he has 8 sons over the period of his life, and all of whom are recognized reincarnations of great masters, many of whom were his contemporaries in his current life or his previous lifetimes. And with the exception of one child who dies early, they all went on to have a major impact in terms of his lineage, in terms of other lineages, and in terms of the Dharma in general. And we see their reincarnations in, up to the current day, as well as their own bloodlines.
Right.
And all of these children were prophesized in many different ways, often by Yeshe Tsogyal. And the most important thing I think that stands out for me is that Dudjom Lingpa didn't make a big deal out of them. There was an assumption that they would go on to do great things, and he just sort of kept moving with his own visionary life, and we as readers are left to look at other resources to find out what they accomplished during their lifetime as his children.
Yes.
And fortunately those resources exist, and then trace it to the present. And just to mention, his first son was the reincarnation of Dodrupchen. So his first son was Dodrupchen III, and Dodrupchen today is a very, very wonderful teacher. He's he's very close to Chatra Rinpoche, who's one of the main Dudjom lineage holders. And he continues to have a prolific Dharma practice both in the East and the West. And then Dudjom Lingpa's third son was a reincarnation of Do Khyentse, who he called, I think, affectionately Khyentse Nyugu, which means sort of the sprout of Khyentse. He actually, in a passage I'll read later, he gets a little more attention because Dudjom Lingpa at one point travels with him as a young child, when he's a young child, to his various enthronements.
I see.
So that's a very public thing. And then, his children are reincarnations of Patrul Rinpoche, they're reincarnations of Chonyi Lingpa, and reincarnations of Longchenpa, and they all went on to do extraordinary things in their lifetime and beyond their lifetime.
It sounds like a great episode of A Family Affair or something. That's wonderful. But there are also these legendary people in his story, the 13 disciples who are said to have attained the rainbow body. And do we know exactly who they were, or is that mentioned in the biography, or is that just a fact that we know from another source?
They are legend, and I would love if we could find a list with their names and some information about them, and maybe we will eventually with the information coming out of his area. But at this point, we don't know their names, and I've made inferences based on mentions and prophecies in the book, and then at different points he's mentioned my student, Seichu passed away with very extraordinary signs, and I assume if Dudjom Lingpa felt it worth mentioning that this was a very significant student, the book that I'm translating now that I'll talk about a little bit later has more specific references to certain students, and so I'm making notes, hoping that maybe enough information will be available later to cross-reference. But the point is that Dudjom Lingpa had 13 students who attained rainbow body based on his students, concurrent with his own lifetime, and that really is incomparable. And that, to me, is one of the greatest sources of inspiration, because what that says to me is they did it, why can't we? And that's in part because we have the same Buddha nature, and we have access to the exact same teachings and the same lineage. And because of teachers like Dudjom Rinpoche, Teeling Over Rinpoche, Lama Turchen Rinpoche, and all you've done to maintain, the Khandro Tuktik lineage, we have access to these completely fresh, intact lineages, and that gives us an opportunity to be just like them.
For sure. Well,
whoever they may be.
Yeah. We have to have hope and positive intention and support ourselves through this way, which is the whole reason for everything that we're doing, this interview, the work, everything, is to bring all beings to awaken.